So International Women in Psychology has gotten together to do a global pandemic discussion. So we are a group of women who are in a different area of psychology, most of us. Some of us are in the same area or specialties of psychology. I personally am a psychotherapist. We are comprised of members who may be females who are psychologists, psychotherapists, psychiatrists. We have pretty much everybody, social workers, counselors, and that sort of thing. So the idea of this particular discussion was to be able to give people on the outside, kind of like lay people, some tips, some tricks, and some information as to how COVID-19 can sometimes subtly affect your primary mode of functioning or overall functioning altogether. My topics that I chose to discuss today are going to be surrounded around the first one that I'm going to present, of course, is going to be procrastination. Procrastination is deeply associated with, how can I say, like depression or depressive moods. And I'm going to talk about that, but also from like a layman's perspective. I want to be able to give you guys enough information for you to go out and be able to combat what you see as presenting symptoms or presenting you guys will have the tools that you need to identify some of the symptoms and combat or mitigate some of the symptoms and the presentation of some of these issues that stop you from living basically your best life. Another topic that I'm going to talk to you guys today about is going to be mental health or mental wellness. We have other people who have different topics, and they have, some of them have already presented. And when I am done with this particular Zoom, what I'm going to do is facilitate space for a collaborative presentation so that you guys can get a chance to see everything that we've done up to this point. Other members of International Women in Psychology, however, have been invited so that if this is suitable for their time zone, they can also go ahead and give you guys some insights from, I published an article and I released it onto LinkedIn. And I'm going to do a quick share screen so that you guys can be able to take a look at it. So let's see if I can make this bigger. Zoom in. Okay, so basically I started off talking about during this pandemic of COVID-19, because we have to talk about when, because this is going to be a bookmarked time stamp basically in history. And so I think that I've already mentioned on a couple of different global conferences that I've done and a lot of appearances that I've done, that it's really important for you guys to, do some journaling, kind of track where you are, track what you're going through, wherever you are in the world. The interesting thing about International Women in Psychology is that we're an international group. And so we're all able to talk about what we're currently experiencing in the various countries that we live in. We can talk about what COVID-19 looks like in our countries versus, just having one perspective and moving from state to state within one country as if it only affects the people there. This is literally one of those particular pandemics that have, I guess at this moment in time, these people who are living out this particular event, this is the first time in their life they've ever seen anything like it. Of course, they've seen a lot of movies like it. We've talked about it on numerous occasions when we review the movies and the books and things like that that talk about epidemics and then that turn to pandemics. So epidemics are just outbreaks, right? Pandemics are outbreaks that are widespread, that have a high infection ratio. And it's a contagion that typically spreads from human to human. And that's the easiest way, and becomes an airborne illness most of the time. And so as people have moved into a place almost of acceptance of some of the things that they've seen, some of their government bodies, especially if we talk about here in the United States, because that's where I live, we've seen a lot of the government bodies respond in a way that looks like they may not be releasing all of the information, all of the details. But the citizens in response have done some things that say, we don't necessarily believe you until we see it. And when things have gotten bad, what I've noticed is that there has been a tremendous trend of people who adapt some of the same behaviors, right, of how the government body has handled the reopening or phased reopening if we're in America. So people start to procrastinate because if we look at the definitive, portion of procrastination, it's the act of putting off some tasks, whatever the tasks are, that are deemed necessary, and some of them are optional tasks, but tasks that we put on our schedule, right? But we don't follow through and we don't do those tasks because we feel like one way or the other, we're in a position to where those tasks now don't really have high priority or any priority at all. And so those things just simply may not get done. Give me just a second so I can allow this other person in. And so when we notice that the things that we are not necessarily giving priority to happen to be more important than what we deemed them important, initially, I think that we should do something. And we should do something that basically says that we've recognized this to be something that we have procrastinated about, which is the way that you overcome it, and move that to the side and look at what it is that thing means for us. It could be something as simple as getting up out of the bed in the morning and brushing your teeth and washing your face, but you feel like because you are locked in, or you feel like you are not going anywhere and you're not doing your regular routine, that you don't have to do that thing anymore. I welcome people today to adapt some really healthy regimens, because I have included some at the end of this article that I composed. And so you have to adapt first a sense of accountability. And that's, like I said, noticing that these are things that you are currently procrastinating about, things that you would be doing normally, but for whatever reason, you decided to vacate the notion of doing those particular things. We have to recognize and call that thing what it is. We may be overwhelmed in the moment, and overwhelmed, when we call ourselves overwhelmed, it's basically, in clinical terms, normally related as anxiety. We're anxious. Everything starts in your brain. And so the way your brain receives the information and receives the actions or behaviors of other people and yourself has a lot to do with how it's processed and what comes next in your behaviors as you respond emotionally to those things. So being in the midst of a global pandemic where people are dying that are around you, and you're having to find new ways of simply coping with dealing with the loss of a loved one. These are things that can lead to depression, and those depressive episodes include things like we see procrastination. So when we talk about your mental health and we talk about everything starting in the brain health is what I like to call it, because at the end of the day, when you do start to exhibit these symptoms, they're not voluntary. They're very much involuntary, and they're in response to the way, like I said, your brain has processed the information that it's received. And so I do believe at some point there was a typo autocorrection in here when I talked about what is responsible. I think it's on the next page. So when I talk about what is responsible for procrastination here on page 2, you'll see me talk about the chemical in your brain called dopamine. And so what I meant by that, I meant dopamine reacts in the synapse. It interacts in your synapse with other neuroreceptors, not neuroscience, auto-corrected. during the process of me composing the article. He didn't catch it until I PDF'd it. So what happens is, this is the area of your brain that is responsible for feeling good, you know, the things that make you feel good, the things that motivate you. And so when we have a lack of motivation, one of the interesting things that we can sit back and observe is that slumber. Sometimes that blank slate, because you don't feel anything. And when you have a flat effect, which is what we call it, or you have a blank slate and you're just sitting there and you're numb, you have to ask yourself, am I going through a depressive episode? Is this depression? You know, is there something that I need to be doing right now? Have I said that I was going to do something and I'm no longer holding myself accountable for? So I talked about that being the number one thing that you need to be doing, holding yourself accountable, developing a sense of accountability. And so in this particular article here, I speak to a couple of things that you can do to, yeah, okay, so this makes it bigger for those of you who could not see it before, and I'll go back to the page one as well. I speak to some of the things that you could be doing to give yourself a more effective routine, which is one of them, so that you can hold yourself accountable, and then you can get through doing some of those things that you typically do. So one of the things you may want to start with is just simply smiling. The brain is a muscle. Yes, and it's an organ as well, but it is a muscle. And so what happens is it receives the external stimuli from the rest of the body, and it typically evokes the production of different chemicals based off of what you're doing. So physically, sometimes if we move and we exert force physically forward with our hand, or you may clench your fist even, and release it really fast after holding it for 5 seconds. What that does is increase the blood flow to the brain, because typically we know that all mental illness has something to do with a lack of blood flow, too much blood flow, etc. in the brain, if you're doing like SPECT scans. And so for me, I like to tie in the neuroscience, because I want people to know how your brain functions and how to basically improve executive functioning, just really, really simply, right? The easy things that we can do to pump the chemicals that we need at the moment. So to produce more dopamine, you can do something as simple as smile. A smile sends a signal that you're in a good mood, you're in a different place. And you all of a sudden find yourself a little bit more clear-minded, and you're more mindful of where you are right now in the moment. And so if you eliminate negative thoughts, which is my number one of the 5 easy tips, when you're receiving information, because I know a lot of people are connected to the media, a lot of people are connected to social media. And so you may see a lot of posts about there may be, this is due to something else. There are conspiracy theories floating all around. This is 5G, all of these types of things. You can't get sick, a lot of those things. So the very first thing that you can do to combat some of that stuff is, I say, unplug completely. So I think it's really important for us to unplug. But I think that if you're a person that just cannot stay away from social media because you are more of an extrovert and you're trying to remain connected to those people that you are, you know, used to following, used to being around, and that kind of thing, I say combat the negative thoughts with, that's not true, automatically. So your brain does not know what the abstract truths are in the world, if they ever exist for you at all. We're all different in the way that we function. And so it's almost like you're tricking your brain, but I call it training the brain. So to be mindful. So when you see the negative thoughts, when you see the negative energy, and even if you're in the house with someone who is a very negative thinking person, and everything that they talk about at every meal is negative energy, refute it internally, and then you verbalize it to make it a real thing. Because when you verbalize it, you're hearing it all over again. That conditioning, just say, okay, that's not true, or that's not necessarily true, right? So that you can warrant further exploration, then you're still doing something. I say radical acceptance and Committing yourself to words and phrases of positive affirmation so that you can reinstall hope to your brain's hard drive, because your brain does kind of function like a computer. And so many, I talked about executive functioning. So you receive information and learn new information from your lower brain, and then it's normally processed over the time that you're sleeping or resting and sent to your prefrontal cortex, and that's the front of the prefrontal lobe. So your frontal lobe is like where information is stored after it's processed. It either gets ready to dump it while you're sleeping, or it's going to store it. And so when you're learning new information, that's why it's important for you to refute the negative thoughts, so that when it's time for you to sleep on that, you further condition yourself with that doubt principle of the negative thoughts, so you can put more positive energy. And I'll even go a step further and say, when you're getting ready to wind down and go to sleep at night, give yourself some words of positive affirmation, or a prayer, or some deep-seated meditation, that sort of thing. It'll put you in a different mood the next morning. I say release the negative energy and wake up anew. So radical acceptance means that we're accepting the things that happen in our life, and sometimes the positions we are in our life that we may simply have no control over. And we have to relinquish and albeit control over everything. If we don't do that, we're going to remain anxious, and we're going to continue to procrastinate, because we're going to be depressed, because you will see that everything does not go your way. And that's just simply reality. And so if we're accepting radically the fact that we are currently in a situation, a global pandemic, this is a very dangerous medical outbreak, to where not only people are getting really sick, but they are dying. And so you run the risk of getting really sick and potentially dying as well if you're out there commingling in situations that you're not sure about how to protect yourself adequately in. And so if you're accepting that, and you're accepting the fact that, hey, I got to be in the house for a 14-day or more quarantine, what that looks like is you're moving into a space of autonomy, to where now you can find other things to do, and you can find meaning and purpose in your personal life, your internal locus of control, the things that you can control, which is your response, that allows you to remain calibrated or balanced, so that your brain and your body is producing the right types of chemicals, the right amount of blood oxygen, and you don't have to worry about any other forms of physical ailment or illness, or mental illnesses. So I think that the more we understand, and the more we attune ourselves to the way that our body functions, and our brain's executive functioning receives and processes information, our perception, I think the more aware and more mindful we can be. Number 3 is process unresolved grief by way of radical acceptance and emotional cathartic releases. And what I mean by that is, I talked earlier about the grief process looking a lot different. So funerals, they definitely look a lot different right now. And I think what has happened is most people feel they're not gaining closure. Even some of my clients, you know, when we have our sessions, a lot of them are telling me right now, they just don't feel like it's real. It's like they're trapped in a nightmare. And if that is something that you feel, you have to validate that feeling. It's okay for you to feel that way, because this is definitely a nightmare for most people. If you've lost anybody due to COVID-19, if you've lost anybody due to other circumstances, but because of COVID-19, your life has changed as to how you are allowed space to grieve that person, right? Closure may be something that you may be personally lacking only because of your perception of how to, you know, transition that person into the next phase of life, which is death, and put them to rest. And so sometimes we need to change our perspective of what that closure must be, or when it can take place. And so I think that if we adapt an idea of, okay, once this is all over, we can organize another memorial service for those, you know, family members, and we can grieve properly as a community. If we allow ourselves, however, as we're going through those different phases of grief, because grief does come in waves when we lose people that we love, or even opportunities. If we're allowing ourselves to have those emotional releases of energy, that's what a catharsis is. And we're allowing ourselves to cry until we don't feel the need to cry anymore, and we finally feel better. Believe it or not, crying actually produces dopamine. So you will feel better after you release that energy. Allowing ourselves to do something in memory or in remembrance of the person that we have lost. And so if that means that you're going out and you're planting a new plant, if it means that you're going out in your garden and you're doing something else in the garden, just simply smelling the roses. These are things that you can do to also increase dopamine, because planting, gardening is one of those things that does increase your serotonin and dopamine levels in your brain. But when you accept the fact that you right now cannot do the things that you would typically do when it comes to a funeral and those services, you'll be in a better place to be able to accept the fact that COVID-19 has transitioned my life, but it doesn't mean that my life is over. And so you'll be able to live, and you'll be able to not be as depressed or as down and more apt to procrastinate. So number 4 is drink plenty of water and get lots of physical exercise. Just because you are quarantined to your home for the 14 days doesn't mean you can't exercise. You can run in place. I recommend jogging in place during a countdown from 30 to 1. That means you're jogging, you're counting to 30, jogging, counting to 29, jogging, counting to 28. That's what it is. You can do some sit-ups, curl-ups, leg lifts, squats, things like that. You can do all of those things from the comfort of your own home. You don't even really have to leave. But I always say fresh air is the best. So pick a good time of the day where other people aren't out and you can remain socially distant from them, and get your exercise in. Get you a nice jog in or a good walk in. And so my number 5 is develop an accountability plan and commit internally to it. It starts in the mind. I started off talking about accountability, holding yourself accountable. And what I mean by that is when we're trying to combat procrastination, like I told you, if you're recognizing and calling a thing, it's easier for you to say, hey, I was supposed to be doing something right now, you know, and it's still 1 in the afternoon and I'm in bed still. I need to get up. I need to brush my teeth, set your alarm, keep yourself on the same routine that you used to have before COVID-19, because at the end of the day, this isn't the end of life. You're going to return back to some sense of normalcy, but you have to first incorporate an adapted sense of normalcy while you're in the mix. Set your alarm, stick to it, set several alarms for other things that you need to be doing. If you're working from home, don't get away from the fact of getting dressed because you know that your face won't be seen by coworkers and things like that. Still get up, do your makeup, you know, cut your hair if you're a guy at home, trim it, maintain it, whatever. I think now is a good time to develop that new skill for doing your hair because nobody can see it and judge you. But do those things that you used to do so that you feel more like you. And that, I feel like, is how the mental health part plays a huge role in this, because your mental health and wellness is an essential component to all functioning for you as a human being. And so the way that you look at this, the way that we're conceptualizing this, the way that we're conceptualizing the reopening, the anxiety associated with that, those pieces are so huge right now that a lot of people are at ends, you know, and at odds with their family members, with their spouses inside of their homes, with their parents, with their children, because they're not quite sure if it's safe enough for them to go out and resume their normal functioning because they're afraid of everybody else being sick. A lot of these things will lead to a negative cycle of behavior, avoidance, like I said, procrastination. Sometimes you'll have these night terrors and daydreams and things like that that get in the way of you living your best life because you're not really focused on the here and now. You're focused on possibilities that aren't even positive. And so for that, I say recognize that people are very, very anxious, and then talk to them, say, you know, you seem like you're a little bit preoccupied, or you seem like you're overwhelmed. Is there anything that I can do? Sometimes we just have to lend a hand. And sometimes we are personally in a place to where we can't accept help from other people. I think that we have to move to a place of acceptance. Like I said, radical acceptance is where it starts. So where if people are offering help to us, even if we feel like we don't need it immediately or in the immediate sense, we'd say, you know what? Yeah, let me find something for you to do. You can still remain safe at a safe distance from one another. You can find yourself doing things together, like going hiking and, you know, gradually introducing yourself back to society, doing some safe recreational things. When you go hiking, you feel better. The sun's in your face. You're increasing the things that you need to be able to stay off this virus, because you need to increase your vitamin D level, vitamin C level, and your vitamin A level. The sun's rays are filled with vitamin D. You're going out there, you're walking, you're increasing your dopamine, so you're reducing your possibility to remain in the depressed state. And you're finding new means of motivation within, because you're getting confirmation every time you go out that, you know what, it may be safe if I continue on the course that I'm on, because you'll get confirmation. You'll see that you're not getting reinfected. I say continue to practice adequate hand washing, but don't get into the point to where you develop kind of like a germophobia, you know, your OCD about washing your hands, and you feel like you basically have to peel off the skin. Keep it very simple. Frequently wash your hands after you're touching and dealing with things for a good 10 to 20 seconds of lathering, and then rinse, and then get back to your life. Lots of people are struggling with suicidal ideation right now. So having a conversation about suicide, having a conversation about just simply wanting all of this to end, having a conversation about things that are factors in their life that cause them to continue to be ambivalent and not necessarily follow through with that. Things, people and things that look like supports for them. I think having those conversations is an essential component to staging off the risk of actual suicide attempts and successes, but also helping people to understand that this is a place to where it's not abnormal for you to be feeling that way, because it's caused a significant amount of distress for people, like I said, that are extroverts. If you're an extroverted person, you're used to being out in the community, and not only just out in the community, but with your friends in close quarters, with those people that you love in close quarters. You're used to having that human connection in a different way. And so those people are now finding alternatives. I say, call and check on them. Make sure they're okay. Don't just say, are you okay? Video chat. Put your eyes on that person. You know, alternative psychotherapy appointments with my clients look like, okay, we may not be in person face-to-face, but we'll definitely be video face-to-face. And that's a requirement for me. I think that you guys have to meet the person where they are. If they're your friend, if they're your family member, and say, you know what, let's cook dinner together. on video. You know, that is something that can make them feel better, believe it or not. You know, or you can have a socially distant dinner. You guys have quarantined for the necessary 14 days. You know that you're good, you're not sick. Either one of you have been anywhere. Go to their house and help them make dinner and stay your, you know, adequate space away from them. You know, you sit at the table on your side, they sit on the table. They sit at the table on their side, about 3, 4 feet, 6 feet away from each other, and having a healthy exchange of dialogue about how your life has transitioned during this time period. You know, have those very difficult conversations, because if you cannot have them, if you cannot be there for a person, sometimes we just need a physical body in the same space with us to help us move forward and feel more secure. You know, that energy in the same room. And so the other piece, as I move through my presentation that I was going to talk about, is human rights. As far as human rights, you still see a lot of things and a lot of perceptions from the general public where they feel like the government has overstepped their boundaries. When things closed up and people were ordered to stay at home, if at all possible, people were thinking and saying, verbalizing, that they had a right to go outside if they wanted to, because they have certain freedoms as citizens. These are the things that they are afforded the right to do. You know, you had a lot of people posting on social media talking about the restrictions among, the restrictions on organizing amongst the people that are parishioners in the church. And they felt that they had been, their rights had been violated because the government is now telling them you cannot organize with that group, that large group of people in a church physically. There were a lot of people who got really sick, and some of them who died after being in congregations at churches. You have to think about the limits of the ability of people to sanitize the place that you're in. You have to look at the possibility of just disease, the contagion, like spreading. You have to look at what's the most sensible thing for you to do. What are the most viable solutions for you to stay safe and for other people to stay safe? It doesn't mean that you have to waver or remove your faith. The church should be embodied in you. But you want to protect your life. You want to do what's sensible and making sure that you're okay. You still see other people's rights being violated now, and you see that there is an increased amount of domestic violence. You see there's still a heavy sense of police brutality. You see there is still a heavy sense of, you know, people breaking into people's homes, so burglaries, even in burglaries in cars. You still see that the crime rates are still going up at ridiculous numbers. We have to find a way to connect with people and still be observing of behaviors that may be indicative of maybe someone is going through a really hard time at home, you know, with their significant other. We as people have to recognize that we are hurting other people, though. I think personal accountability is where it starts. Someone outside of you shouldn't have to recognize that there is a problem within your system before you do. I want everybody to start doing what I like to call weekly self-reflection, to where you're just calling things what they are in your life, not judging them, but noticing that over the past week, these are things that I found to be valuable to me in the various domains of life and family, recreational activity, environment, work life and balance, and the biggest one, friends and extended family members. And so even if you just evaluate those few areas, you will find that you have more of an increased aptitude to value one And it may be very different from the one you value the next week. When you're looking at what you don't value as much, I want you to examine what it is about that happened, that particular domain of your life, functional domain of your life, that made it less valuable in your life than other things. And then I want you to commit to examining it further. Maybe find 2 or 3 things that you can do to increase the value for that thing in the next week. And so what that does is allows you to see that maybe you're going through some things. Maybe there's some internal struggle that you're having in regards to your significant other, some areas that you haven't explored that made you uncomfortable or less secure with your relationship. And then you can get to talking to them in a way that allows you to say, okay, yeah, we're having these issues. We're holding each other accountable, and create a safe space for communication so that you can resolve those issues and get back to living a more feasible life for people that are in an intimate partner companionship. I think that brings down those domestic violence numbers. Other things that we feel like, are affecting people and they feel like their human rights have been violated. For example, people who have been in the house for just simply too long. We have to recognize why they feel that way. We have to normalize what their feelings and emotions in response to, this countrywide lockdown, regardless of what country you are in. We have to normalize their experiences, validate what they're going through, and then sit down and have a conversation with them and help them talk through it. Find alternatives to them being locked in the house the whole time and help them move out gradually and find things to do that are meaningful. Find out where they feel like their rights have been violated and see what you can do to advocate on their behalf, to help them, but to safely advocate. When we talk about the increase in police brutality, we've got to start saying, as countries, from country to country, we've got to call it what it is. Oftentimes we'll just identify one group of people and we'll say Black people are the ones that are being targeted here in America, or, for the Hispanic people that are being targeted, they'll say it's us, because what you're doing is you're limiting your exposure to the real problem. Start advocating for, more intensive testing, right? For the aptitude of people having or developing personality disorders that are police officers. Start advocating for a more intensive background check and a higher level of security clearance for those people. Because what that'll do is it'll reduce the amount of police brutality significantly, because we'll know that we're hiring quality and stable individuals. Advocate for more mental health in the police force, more mental health in even military units, more mental health even in regular jobs for people, because what that does is allow people to have an outlet to express themselves, to navigate some of the things that may be causing them to offset. It destigmatizes mental health, and it allows people to feel more comfortable with going in and talking to somebody about some of the issues they may be going through. We have to put more clinicians, I think, in the community as well, because I think the more people are able to express what they're going through and the more linkage and referrals that we can connect them to, as far as them getting help, as far as them relieving some of their financial stress and things like that, that are some of the underlying issues in impoverished communities, the more we're able to mitigate some of that and connect people with resources that they may not otherwise have access to. I think the more active of a role will be taken in reducing the number of human rights violations by way of crime. And so for people who are organizing to say that they want the country to reopen, I think that other people who feel more anxious and afraid still should be doing self-work. And they should be allowing those people to organize as long as they're doing so safely, without all of the name calling. Because if you're following news stations that are on social media, basically putting this stuff out, you will see that the nature of people has just shifted to very negative, and everyone is very defensive. Everybody's attacking everybody. And nobody is giving people space to simply be expressing what it is that they're currently feeling, their distress, to simply be autonomous and not mimic everything that everybody else is doing, but have an independent lens in which they look through life and say, okay, if you're ready for something, I can understand how you could be, but I'm just not, you know? And then explore the why you're not. And they should be allowing you to be how you are and feel how you feel, because you're not the same person. I think the more that we relinquish the idea of control and albeit all-knowing understanding of what another person is going through and what their experience should or shouldn't entail, I think the more we will embrace the idea that sometimes your rights are not the rights you thought they were, for one. And sometimes just because you have the right to do something, it's not sensible to do that thing in the moment. So I know I have other members that are a part of our IWIP. If you guys want to present, then you are definitely open to do so. And I'm going to check my thread on YouTube. Let's see. Also, I'll open it up for a discussion now. You guys can give me your feedback while I'm doing that. Here. And then I'll get back. Over to my other screen. It's so interesting how you can have like all of these screens open. One of the things that I have definitely learned to do is to adapt in presentations. So I typically do a lot of speaking, public speaking engagements and things like that. And so you don't need to know all of this technology. Just click the button for slides. But this has definitely changed the way that we deliver presentations, information, and I think the reach as well. It makes it definitely something that's convenient. So how do you guys have any questions or comments about the current state, you know, of your union, wherever you are? I'd love to know where you guys are as well. I think I can see my, yeah, I can see them both now. Here to chat availability. And so when I put the presentation back together, what that will look like is you guys will see some of the video presentations that other clinicians have put together on their end, and then I'll reintroduce it to YouTube, and everything will kind of go one behind the other, and it will be one big presentation, and you guys can kind of skip through, and then I guess once we put in the edits and things like that, the titles will be there between just before each segment. And then maybe I'll even see if I can do like, okay, if you skip through to the minute and second here, you'll be able to view this topic that's being presented by this clinician, etc. So that pretty much wraps up my portion for it. And I want to review the comments if you guys have any on the YouTube before we close out. Oh my goodness. Told you guys I'm not tech savvy. And Zoom. Okay. You said, so Jane says, how are you dealing with cases of domestic violence in this season? So I do both sides. I do victims advocacy and recovery, but I also do users advocacy and recovery from a clinical stance. And so I spoke to it a little bit, I think maybe before you came, and the increased numbers of domestic violence situations. What I'm doing is I'm helping those people learn new ways of communicating during times of conflict. And so I think conflict communication is the key to resolving very, very heavy weighted issues with couples and so on and so forth. And so we have to find ways to allow other people to feel however they feel. And at the same time, we have to give ourselves space for our own personal autonomy. And we have to be people who hold one another accountable. So when you put all of that together, you're helping people just simply develop new mechanisms of understanding other people and being able to articulate the type of person they are, with them also taking into account accountability. So why am I doing the things that I'm doing right now? You know, exploring your history, exploring their path of development of their personality, of the actions that they're doing in their life, their behaviors. And so it all comes from somewhere, because hurt people hurt people. And if we want to break the cycle, we have to be people who acknowledge the fact that there are insecurities within ourselves that contribute to those types of actions. And if we're going to mitigate those behaviors, we have to be able to look and call a thing. You know, this is something that I have a problem with, because I recognized early on when I was 6 years old, maybe, that my mother was abused by my father oftentimes, or my father was abused by my mother oftentimes, or I came from a broken home where my siblings were abused sexually and their reaction or response was to inflict physical pain upon me. What am I doing that is indicative of my repeating that cycle in an unhealthy way, instead of healing and revealing those layers that I've tucked away so that I could just simply survive? I think people have to learn that life is not about just simply surviving. Life is about thriving. If you live life to the attunement and with curiosity, so that you're learning something every day, you end up taking lessons from every experience and every exposure in your life, no matter how negative on the surface it may seem, so that you can apply those principles to your next phase of life in your development, because we're on an evolutionary cycle, essentially, as we're living, of growth, you know, and maturation. And when we mature from an emotional stance, it means that we've evaluated those different functional domains, and who's adding value and who's taking away, who's sucking the life from me, who do I need to cut the cord on. You know, we have to be people who recognize that, you know, sometimes people have to make their exit from your life. They can't stay forever, right? So everything in its proper season and in its proper reason for it being there in your life. But that's what I'm doing clinically. I help people navigate, you know, their journey, their pathway of how they got into their particular position. I hope that answers. What are some of the things that you're doing, Jane? And where are you located?
I can unmute now, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Kenya.
Okay.
And the things that you said are really interesting. I don't know, I think it's because I haven't worked a lot with the abusers. I've worked mostly with the victims of abuse. And so the narrative I think I have adopted over time is changing for, how do I put it? When you were saying what you were saying, what was running through my mind was there's a lot of openness for both parties, and I think a lot of people lack openness for both parties, both the abuser and the victim, because often cases the abuser was also a victim that they're working through. So yeah, it's been a bit difficult because you'll find organizations that offer help for this, mostly women, are closed or they're operating at minimum capacity, so they're unable to really help them or offer a lot of help. So that has been a struggle, and I've been trying to figure out how do you help people in that capacity.
So do you notice that for you, there are, certain biases that sometimes prevent you from being able to do your best work? Sometimes, like when you go back and reflect on it, or are you pretty much able to kind of remove those biases and still adapt and overcome?
For most of my cases, I'm able to work without bias, but there's some, I think, when you start doing the work, you notice that your biases come in. I think, especially working with victims of abuse, I haven't talked to so many, but the ones on my way, I find myself, for lack of a better word, sorry.
I couldn't hear you. Your thing went out, your signal. It's okay.
Can you hear?
No, say something else.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, now I can hear you.
All right. So I'm saying for most of my clients, most of the clients I work with, I don't find myself struggling with bias, but when it comes to abuse, sometimes bias does come in. Like I've just realized right now when you are talking that I had a bias and I wasn't carrying it because I haven't thought of abusers. I've worked mostly with victims. So until you stated it right now, I hadn't considered it.
And it's I think it's one of those things that because we are human, right? And I tell people all the time, a clinician is not outside of being a human being. And being a human being, we have to work in a place that allows us to just simply, in some areas, be able to better cultivate space for healing for other people by recognizing some of the things that I think that we have personal views on that may weigh on the way that we deliver therapy. For me, my personal way of dealing with my biases and things that may kind of change the way that I initiate my work with my clients is simply to recognize when they're giving me their story, their narrative, like, am I finding ways to personally identify with those things? Or am I finding ways to professionally help them understand better what it is they're going through? And so those are two different things. For me, if I'm in a place where I'm just simply helping them navigate, providing their narrative, and I'm just simply helping them go through life, trying to have better ways to cope with or better ways to, view some of the things that they're going through and adapt healthier mechanisms for living their life in general. It doesn't include me putting myself in a position of, well, if I were them, I would do that. Or I remember when I went through that, and I know that that's tough for them. Because when we start saying things like that, I feel like we are now inflicting and literally exploring therapy with them from a biased lens instead of a therapeutic lens. And so it's one thing for us to, employ accurate empathy and be empathetic for what they're going through and understanding. But that requires curiosity. And that's the difference. I think that when we are exploring therapy with them from a curious lens, so that we can provide them with a clinical conceptualization of what they're going through, that looks like, that must have been really difficult for you. Was it something you found to be particularly difficult? Did you have issues accepting that particular experience? Asking those types of questions, probing for their personal feelings and personal afflictions that they have gained or been inflicted with over the course of those relationship turmoils. Because domestic violence is definitely something that affects not just couples, but people, right? In general, because it's a domestic situation. It means that it's happening on citizens' soil of a country and people that so it might be your friends, it might be your family members. Those people can also attribute some level of domestic violence to you. Intimate partner violence, however, I think is more elevated because you have so many people that are stuck in that cycle of abuse because they've grown very close and connected with that person. And so when you're in an intimate partner violent relationship, the way it differs, the way that I conceptualize it and explain it to people, the easiest way to understand it is that when you're in an intimate partner companionship with a person, eventually that person becomes a mirror of you. And we like to refer it as codependency and that sort of thing, but not necessarily. It's a normal phase of development over the life cycle of a couple's relationship. Even in polygamous relationships and polyamorous relationships that are polyandrous in nature, those people are all interconnected. It's a web of connectivity that is drawn not only by filial lives and not only by filial lines, but they're also interconnected on some invisible loyalties to one another. And so you have to find out what are the loyalties, what are the things that you vowed, even unsubconsciously to deliver to that person. How did you say you were going to continue to be there for that person? Does your actions, right, reflect that you are holding up that level of integrity to that relationship, for one, and to those people, for two? Because the loyalties that we have and the fidelity we have to the relationship is something different than we have to those individuals. The relationship is an individual breathing and living component that has its own growth that it has to, embark upon. What the people that are a component to the relationship are responsible for is pouring into and cultivating that relationship, sort of like a tree, if you will. And so if we're doing that work towards cultivating the ideal relationship, then we don't experience domestic violence or intimate partner violence within the confines of our relationship. We experience love, maturation, and going through, we may have tough times, but we're able to adequately problem solve in a very safe space because the relationship allows us to do that. To understand that we have to have our individuation and differentiation away from the house of the relationship separately, and we have to be able to express who we are through the relationship. And that person and the relationship is going to help us grow better on the outside of it as well, as long as we're doing our part. And it's about understanding what led to the intimate partner violence. I know a lot of clinicians are very, very afraid to have sessions even with people who have struggled with intimate partner violence, and the first thing that they do is jump to making a decision for that person, right? Because, you know, we've all been geared up as to how to create escape plans for the victims. We know how to deal with the victim. You know, it's okay. We can do that. We can do the victim work. That's the easy stuff. But then when the victim is ambivalent about leaving, because internally they are, that's the truth. Anybody that you've developed an escape plan for, anybody that you as a clinician have kind of, you know, positioned yourself as a therapist that says, you know, girl, you need to leave. You know, guy, you need to leave. Violence doesn't live in love. You know, we cannot say that, because there is no way that we can objectively and honestly say to a person that there is an abstract locus of control for every human being that's identical. And so what that means is that we already know as a clinician that all people respond to distressing situations in the same way. They don't. They simply don't. So we can't say that when a person is heavily distressed, they feel like they've been betrayed in some way in that relationship, their feelings, we can't invalidate their feelings with, it's never justified for you to hit that other person. We can justify that the feelings of that intimate partner that has been abused, however, that person never expected you to hit them. You understand what I'm saying? And so because you defied the trust that they put in you to protect them, because that's what I hear them saying, they're now ambivalent about whether or not they should be able to trust you and go to sleep with you and be with you and cook for you and nurture for this relationship with you. So how does it feel knowing how they're feeling right now in this moment? Because what they're feeling is that you have betrayed them. Helping them to understand that piece is how you connect the abuser with a different side of them, because you're not judging them, but you're helping them to be in a place of understanding, simply understanding where that other person is coming from. Because oftentimes the person who's abused, they've already, and it's so many ways that they conceptualize that this is okay, this is acceptable, it's something I did, because they internalize naturally. And it's not about you internalizing it. It's not about you understanding or feeling like you're to blame for it. Because when I tell people about relationship issues, nobody is to blame. The relationship is a house in and of itself. It's a living and breathing entity. It's an organism that's by itself and is separate. So the people that are party to that relationship are never to blame for anything. And they're like, well, I cheated. And I cheated, so he beat me. And that means it's my fault. No. The relationship, when it's not being cultivated properly, will call on both of you to do something outrageous to get back to it. Because no two people are always leaning in at the same time for the same amount of time. So the relationship may need more of you than you had been willing previously to attribute to it. And so that's its way of getting your attention. It's just like a child acting out. They don't act out because they just want to. They act out because they need something from you. And so in order to get that need, all of a sudden you're in a place doing things that you have already conditioned yourself as not ever being able to be in that space. I'll never cheat. I'll never hit my woman. I'll never hit my man. You say these things, and what you do is set yourself up for failure because you fail to recognize when it's coming. What I notice is that oftentimes the abusers are sometimes hurt more than the person that's being abused when they start to recognize that they are something they thought they were not. They become something that they swore to never become. And oftentimes this is after they've already left their significant other because they realize that they bought a part out of them that they never wanted to see. And through therapy, they realize it's not that they bought something out of you didn't want to see. It's about the fact that you focus too much on trying to not become a thing, and that became the thing that you became because it was there. When you want greatness out of life, when you want growth and maturation out of life, you have to achieve that by way of evoking the positive emotions, not refuting and fighting the negative emotions and the negative actions. And so what that looks like is positive self-talk, not reflective or reactivity. And so if you're trying to become a particular person, speak that into existence. Don't say, I don't want to become my father, because that's exactly what you will become. Let's talk about what you do want to become. I want to become a great man. I want to become a great woman. I want to put my energy in this type of advocacy. I want to put my energy in this type of advocacy, because then those things that you seek to avoid naturally will never be a part of that cycle, because it doesn't align with the things that you desire in your life. And so I think that when you're working with couples who are struggling with intimate partner violence, families who are struggling with domestic violence in their life, you have to allow them space to really understand one another, but also create a safe space for expression, if you will. Transparency, because you have to remove the judgment. When we're judging people for the things that they're doing, we're only further digging a hole that they've already started to dig themselves. Therapy is supposed to be a place for transformative growth. You grow in a way that transforms not only yourself, but it transforms the way that you view life in general. And you're not afflicted with the things that drive guilt. Does that make sense? Pamela, did you have anything before we close out too? You're sick. January, really weak. I can hear you. So I can't hear you. I did message it to you. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out this segment so that I can start receiving some of the presentations from the other clinicians and putting it all together. And if you guys have anything else, feel free to call me and we can converse further there. And I know like for the followers, the people who are viewing from YouTube, and if you guys catch this on the replay, let me know if you have questions, you know how to reach me. And of course, my email, my phone number, and things like that are listed there. So I do appreciate you guys' time and attention in this video. If you made it to the end, say Yahoo. So that's all that I have. You guys have an amazing rest of your Saturday.